who are you as a person and what are the issues that you most care about? What are the skills that you bring to the table? What's the problem that most animates you, and how do you learn about that problem? And then what's the right pathway given your background and experience?
Great wealth demands great wisdom. Great power demands great care. This is Principles of Benevolence. So let's explore how to build companies that matter, invest with intention, and lead with benevolence at the core. My guest today has spent his career answering one question: what does business owe the world? Brian Trelstad is the William Henry Bloomberg Senior Lecturer at Harvard Business School and Faculty Chair at the Advanced Leadership Initiative, a university-wide program helping accomplished leaders find their pathway to purpose and what he calls the third chapter of their careers. Before Harvard, Brian was Chief Investment Officer at Acumen Fund, where he oversaw investments across South Asia and Africa. He then joined Bridges Fund Management as the first U.S. partner, deploying over $100 million in impact-focused growth equity. He is a founding board member of Impact Capital Managers, a Kaufman Fellow, and a Henry Crown Fellow at the Aspen Institute. In this conversation, you'll hear how to identify the problem to dedicate your life's work to, even if you have no idea what that is yet. You'll get practical frameworks on how to decide if you're going to launch a nonprofit or for-profit company, and you'll get Brian's honest feedback on people that follow through on building something meaningful and people who don't. This is for anyone who wants to do more than just make money. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you for having me, Ebony.
So for context, me and Brian have known each other for a few years. We've done similar work in venture capital. He helped us found an organization called Impact Capital Managers that I was heavily involved in. And he teaches a class at HBS about venture and purpose. And you asked the class if there was a investment that they were interested in having a HBS case study written about. And somehow they stumbled upon Meaningful Gigs, which is a company that I invested in at the seed stage that connects designers in Africa to U.S. enterprises for work. So Brian reached out and I was able to work with him to have that company featured in an HBS case study and like my thinking around that company, which was really cool.
That's right. Yeah, that's the class in social entrepreneurship where I ask students to identify a social enterprise of their choice. And through a kind of peer review, reading one another's papers, and a class discussion, the students pick from their peers which case would make the best new case for the course each year. And on the final day of class, there's usually 8 or 10 students who stand up and in 2 minutes share why a company like Meaningful Gigs would make a great contribution to the class the next year. And the winning one, based on popular vote, I commit to exploring a case. And not every case have I written about, but when I met Ronnie and the team at Meaningful Gigs, the challenges that they were facing at the time were quite interesting for us and made a great addition to the course. And I've taught it both in my MBA course as well as in the Advanced Leadership Initiative. So it's been a real pleasure. And now I'm actually a customer of Meaningful Gigs, as I've used them for some graphic work relating to a couple of books I've been working on. So it's a great full circle story for us. It's fun. Yeah.
And so for anyone that's interested in angel investing or maybe getting into impact investing, I will link that case in the show notes if you want to go and take a look to better understand my thinking of how I made that investment, and then gives you exhibits that you can see if you would make the same decision. Okay, so now jumping into learning all about Brian and his work. So most people that are in finance optimize for only returns. You spent your career arguing that that's a false choice. What convinced you that purpose and profit could coexist before that was a mainstream idea?
Yeah. All of my time prior to going to business school was spent in the nonprofit sector or social entrepreneurship. I was an early employee of AmeriCorps, the national service program launched by President Clinton in the 90s. And so for me, I went to business school to try to understand how high growth, high impact nonprofits, and most of the organizations at the time were nonprofits. You assumed that that's who was going to try and change the world. But when I landed at business school in the late 90s, this was starting to change. Venture philanthropy was an idea. There were a number of really thoughtful business leaders like Paul Hawken and Bill McDonough who were talking about sustainability of business. The B Corp movement had yet to be born, but there were many B Corps like Patagonia who were trying to show people a different way. And from my perspective, sequence was not uh, profit with purpose, but rather purpose using profit. That's why I went to business school. And how could you design a social enterprise that might be financially self-sustaining or even profitable, that could attract investments that would deliver meaningful impact? And so my first job in impact investing was with Acumen Fund, which was a spin out of the Rockefeller Foundation in the early 2000s. I had the privilege of getting to know Jacqueline Novogratz, who was a Stanford Business School alum, as she was still at the Rockefeller Foundation and needed a summer intern to help write the business plan and put together some PowerPoint slides and do an Excel model. And I really enjoyed working with her, and it spent a few years right after graduate school at McKinsey, but my heart and mind were really on social entrepreneurship. So after a few years, I called Jacqueline up, and they'd already started making investments, and pretty soon found myself on that team. And the animating question at Acumen was, how can you provide capital to businesses that will be delivering high quality goods and services to those in the economic base of the pyramid in emerging markets? And the sort of belief was that the market is a very powerful listening device, that it attracts capital, that it improves efficiency, and that there were some longstanding problems, whether that was the scourge of malaria or lack of access to clean water or agricultural inputs or early childhood education, that with the right design and source of capital, one might deliver more meaningfully than nonprofits have been doing. So for me, it's always been purpose using profit rather than profit with purpose.
And after Acumen, where did your career take you after that? Did you stay in a similar field?
Yeah, so I was at Acumen Fund for over 8 years and helped build out teams in India, Pakistan, Kenya, Ghana, Colombia. And I realized I either needed to move to spend more time in country, or I needed to hire my replacement to do that. So I sought with Jacqueline and the management team and board at the time to sort of recruit my successor as the chief investment officer of Acumen. But then I wanted to do something in the United States. I wasn't sure exactly what that would be. And so I took 6 months off, and apropos of kind of the conversation we'll have about third chapters, I started teaching a course at Princeton. I lived near Princeton and had gotten connected to the dean of the School for Public and International Affairs there. And so started teaching social entrepreneurship at Princeton in between Acumen Fund and what would become Bridges Fund Management. Bridges, which was founded at about the same time that Acumen Fund was founded in the early 2000s, had focused historically on the UK with growth equity and venture capital and private real estate, all focused on impact, all from a market perspective. So while Acumen Fund had a philanthropic tradition, the founding chair of Bridges was Sir Ronald Cohen, who had helped build up Apex Partners as a leading private equity firm. And his insight was that you could do profit with purpose through impact investing. And he helped with my colleagues, Phil Newborough and Michelle Giddens, launch Bridges, which remains one of the largest built from purpose impact investment fund managers. And so after having spent some time teaching and thinking about what a U.S. strategy might be, I joined Bridges as the first U.S. partner. We've subsequently raised and invested and now exited about $100 million of investments in growth equity as well as private real estate.
And now you're at Harvard and you wear a lot of hats. Can you tell me about your various roles there?
I moved to Boston in 2017 for my wife's job. We were living in New Jersey, and I was by that point, we'd raised the fund, we were investing the fund at Bridges, but my wife, who makes vaccines, had an opportunity that brought us here. And so for a couple of years, I was commuting to New York and traveling to companies and doing my Bridges job. Kind of an early example of the remote or flexible work that became all of our lives in 2020, and was given an opportunity to teach at HBS. The faculty here, there had been a case written about Acumen Fund, and so the faculty here knew about my work and knew that I'd been teaching at Princeton, and then knew that I was in Boston, and so reached out and said, "Hey, if you'd be interested." And so I started to teach here, and that slowly over time and through COVID went from 20% to 50%. And then when the choice came to kind of re-raise a fund versus start teaching full time, the end of our investment period, I decided I wanted to spend more time at Harvard, and that was really due to my insight that in my third chapter, what I love doing is writing and teaching in first the MBA program. And so I started teaching my course on social entrepreneurship to the MBAs in 2019, and took me a couple years to get used to the case method at Harvard Business School, and found my footing over time, started writing new cases along, like the Meaningful Gigs case, and was asked to teach in the first year program. Harvard has a very strong first year foundational core curriculum, and that really forms the heart of the culture of the school, because it's 10 sections of 92 students each who form their own kind of personality. So I got a chance to teach the business ethics course, Leadership and Corporate Accountability. And in those 2 or 3 years of teaching an increasing workload, I got connected to a number of the Advanced Leadership Initiative fellows who are late career folks who are done with their primary income earning career and want to figure out what their pathway to purpose might be. So they're given an opportunity through this fellowship, a year-long fellowship, to come to Harvard to think that through. They have a core course that's for them, but they also can audit courses across the university. And in my very first year, I had 4 or 5 ALI fellows take my class on social entrepreneurship and said, "This is great. You should teach this to the full ALI cohort." And so I got pulled into the program by my predecessor as faculty chair, Meredith Rosenthal. And when she wanted to go back into her teaching and research at the School of Public Health, she put my name forward as a potential successor. So since 2024, I've been the faculty chair of ALI, which is, again, this cohort of about 40 to 50 people from around the world, really amazing leaders who are using a year at Harvard to understand and define what their pathway to purpose might look like.
Before we dive into ALI, I'm now a little bit curious about your leadership and ethics course.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know, just like what are major themes? What are pitfalls?
Yeah.
Where are we seeing people fail today? And how can we do better?
Yeah. So the course Leadership and Corporate Accountability is one of the only required business ethics course at a major business school. It's taught to all first years. It's a full semester class. And it really raises the question, to whom do we owe responsibilities? It is not just to shareholders as general managers, but it includes responsibilities to customers, to employers, and to society at large, in addition to our important investor responsibilities that are outlined in fiduciary duty. And so the course looks at those responsibilities through 3 lenses: the economic, what do we owe our shareholders, our employees, our customers, in terms of kind of a fair return, fair wage, fair product. From a legal perspective, what are the legal boundaries in different market and in all economies that you have to abide by with respect to consumer protections, with respect to employee law, with respect to investor safeguarding, with respect to societal expectations. But it also introduces a third lens, not just economic or legal, but ethical. And what are the right things to do when you're in a period of ambiguity? So, for example, you can imagine the emergence of betting markets, which have become essentially unregulated exchanges. And so what's the right way before the regulators come in and regulate? If they do, we happen to be in a period of really low regulation in the United States right now. What's the right ethical thing to do if you're the general manager of a site that's not currently being regulated? Is it to exploit consumer behavior and preferences for maximum profit? Is it to create a fair exchange? And so when you find yourselves absent the legal guidance, but with a tempting economic opportunity in front of you, we do try to school the students in an ethical framework that will allow them to make the right decision uh, for the right reasons.
What's coming to the top of my mind is like how so many people are thinking about this in regards to AI and, responsible investing, and how if the policies haven't caught up yet with as rapidly as this is evolving, then what is the responsibility of the leaders
Right.
to protect us?
That's right. And we look at cases like Jewel, which, you know, kind of exploited the lack of regulation and or the enforcement of the regulation and or the adherence to the regulation in some of their distribution channels. And, it's my view that over time, a category that systematically exploits consumers or employees or society writ large through bad environmental actions or other externalities that are harmful ends up getting caught in sort of the regulatory net, for better over time. And so it's a question of whether or not you want to help the industry self-regulate its way there or wait for the government to catch up.
Yeah, and for those not familiar, Juul is the
The
vaping
vaping.
for
Yeah.
teens.
Yeah.
Fun fact, my first job at 16 was working for the health department in Detroit. I had a chaperone that would drive me around to different gas stations, and I had to
Oh,
go
you were
in.
a mystery shopper for vaping?
I had to, not for vaping, just for cigarettes. I
Oh,
had to
really?
go in and say, "Can I have a pack of cigarettes?" And
Yeah.
98 of the 100 stores that I went in said no. I also would have to look and see if cigarettes were placed near candy or
Wow.
things like that. So
Oh, that's great.
strange, but that was my first job.
That's a great job.
Okay, so getting to the advanced leadership.
Yep.
So this is for people that are toward the later chapters in their career
Yep.
and they're trying to shift into something purposeful. I can see why this made sense for baby boomer generation where you work one job to retire. But I can tell you that for millennials and Gen Z, we're a little bit more anxious thinking about changing jobs every 2 to 5 years. So as people listening to this podcast might not necessarily qualify for the advanced leadership yet, but are thinking about incorporating purpose into their work.
Yeah.
How do you help people think about like the large societal challenges or whatever is bigger than them that they want to dedicate themselves to?
So the program was founded in 2009 by my HBS colleague, Rosabeth Moss Cantor, who was a kind of a pioneering management scholar and organizational behaviorist and sociologist. And she sort of observed a couple of trends, one being increasing longevity, two being a set of really experienced leaders who had talents that could be contributed to three, an increasingly complex set of problems. And the university might be a great springboard for that. And so we are the first of what are these so-called third chapter programs, the third chapter being the title of a phenomenal book by a colleague of mine at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, Sarah Lawrence Lightfoot, who calls the third chapter the transformative and generative years between 50 and 75. It's her belief that at that point, people have achieved what they set out to achieve and are no longer held back by the inhibitions of what they have to be when they grow up. And for those who have the time and resources to spend a year thinking about this in the context of an academic program, we equip people with an opportunity to reflect on where they've come from and where they're going to. And it really starts with their essays. And we try to select people who may not have a clear idea of what they want to do, but have a personal narrative which suggests that inside of them, there is this yearning to address a longstanding problem. And that I find that idea of proximity, as Brian Stevenson calls it, to a particular problem gives you the kind of curiosity and persistence required to make a difference. If it's just a passing fad, oh, I read about this, I should do something about it, it's not going to allow you to really push yourself to think through and to connect with the right people unless you've got a deep commitment to that. So one of the first exercises we do is to get people to tell in their peer group a short version of their life story, both the highs and the lows. And it becomes kind of clear through that and through the application that there's something that's, call it the pebble in their shoe, that they want to interrogate. We use a framework that my colleague at the Kennedy School, Julie Badalana, talks about called person, problem, and pathway. So who are you as a person and what are the issues that you most care about? What are the skills that you bring to the table? What's the problem that most animates you and how do you learn about that problem? And then what's the right pathway given your background and experience? Who else is attacking this problem and where you might either join in or complement them. So the person problem pathway is the overarching framework that we use to help people understand how to solve any problem. And then we bring in scholars from across the university and around the world to help them understand whether it's the science of climate change or the drivers of the homelessness crisis or opportunities in longevity and healthy aging. We do a series of those deep dives, but they're auditing courses across the university to better inform themselves about a particular issue they care about. And then we, as the ALI team, bring in faculty to help them understand how do you develop a problem statement? How do you do user-centered design on what a solution might be? How do you think about who the competitive landscape of nonprofits and government agencies and market-based solutions to that problem and figure out whether there's in fact a gap to be filled? If there isn't a gap, how might you join one of the most effective efforts? What does effectiveness look like? If there is a gap, how might you start for profit, a nonprofit, get the resources required to start to build something? Our hope is that people over the course of the year find a pathway to purpose, and you can either launch a new project, join an existing platform, or have a portfolio of activities. But our hope is over the course of the year, you dedicate your third chapter to making a meaningful difference on a problem that you care about, and that we at ALI have made a meaningful difference in your ability to affect that problem in the balance of the time you want to work on it.
And it sounds like for people when they're researching the problem, they can do that through auditing different classes across Harvard and sitting in on those classes to learn about those issues. Are there other ways for people that aren't at Harvard, how you would help them think about digging deeper into the problem that they're interested in and seeing if there's a gap to fill?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing is to get some understanding of the problem space itself. Why does the problem exist? And we use systems thinking as a discipline coming out of systems dynamics, which is, what are the hidden forces that cause, for example, educational inequity in the United States? Well, we fund our local public schools with real estate taxes. And so you have a virtuous cycle where high income communities have resources available for great schools. And because there are great schools, people want to live in those high income communities, which makes them more expensive. And as the real estate values go up, there's more resources for those schools. And you have basically, educational segregation happening on income levels based on that. And so whatever your problem space is, we ask the questions, what holds that problem in place? As one of my colleagues who I co-teach with, Gerald Shertavian, who launched and founded this organization called Year Up, will ask, when you pass somebody on the street who is experiencing homelessness, you don't say what a great system we have here that person is there. There are some people who ascribe it to that person's moral failings, but those of us who are systems thinkers recognize that there's a whole bunch of workforce, healthcare, mental health, and housing systems, transportation systems, criminal systems that just make it hard for that person to thrive. And so the question then is, what is the set of systems that are holding the problem you care about in place? There's no problem that is itself kind of independent. So I would encourage people who don't have a year to spend at Harvard to go to the public library and get some books on the issue that they care about. There are courses. My course on social entrepreneurship is free at Harvard X to take a course on social entrepreneurship. There are a ton of really amazing courses at Harvard or MIT or Stanford or Coursera that are about the particulars of the issue you most care about. So the only way to make progress is to focus on something, and it's not the education system. It might be early childhood education, or it might be workforce training for opportunity youth like Year Up. And so you can't just say I'm going to fix the environment. You have to pick a narrow geography, a narrow issue that you care about, or education. You got to decide, is it K through 12? Much like how an investor chooses an investment thesis. Is it workforce? Is it higher education? Is it corporate? Is it early childhood? There's no right or wrong answer, but you have to find a place where you want to lean in. And then I think where people end up having the most success in their time at Harvard is building meaningful relationships with faculty at centers who are curious about the same problem. And so to extract oneself from the Harvard context, in every city, there are amazing organizations working on any combination of problems. And so to go and find who are the leading players in every state university, there are faculty doing amazing research, and figure out ways to go to an open lecture, figure out ways to get involved with, become a donor or volunteer to one of those organizations that's doing great work. And your learning journey really is a dialogue with what are you learning and what do they know, and finding ways to very narrowly plug into the thing that you care about. Again, it's don't show up at your education school at, state university and say, I really want to fix the education system. Say, hey, I've been reading a lot about, our state's K through 5 challenges with third grade math tests, and I'd love to figure out what I might do to help. And is there a curriculum out there that we could test, or are there things that we could try, or who's working on this? That starts to create a conversation that allows you to learn more and figure out, well, where might I be able to help? So that would be my recommendation of how to simulate the environment off campus if I were to advise somebody to try and do it themselves.
What you're speaking about sounds like the user testing or the user
Yeah.
interviews. I know when I'm talking to a pre-seed company or a seed stage company, when you're just kind of getting the idea off the ground, we would say, go and talk to 30 potential customers to better
Right.
understand. Is it similar? Is that a
Yeah.
similar framework that you guys?
Yeah. And we do a design thinking session, and we will have many of the fellows want to launch something, but we push back and make sure that it's ready, aim, fire on the new idea versus I've got this idea, I want to run with it. And we often say, yeah, you need to have had at least a couple dozen conversations with actual users of this idea or other experts, and or have gotten data from 150 plus folks. And if you talked to 2 undergraduates or 2 people experiencing a mental health crisis, yes, the plural of anecdote is data, technically, but you need to get enough folks from enough different perspectives to know that you're not just seeking self-validating perspectives, but in fact challenging perspectives. And it's certainly not going to be found necessarily just on Harvard's campus. So get back to the place where you want to do the work and try to find people who are actively involved in the field and get their perspectives, both beneficiaries, other providers, experts. And so that really is the way that people learn. Have an idea that you can bounce off them. It's not a bad idea to ideate early, but don't invest too much in the ideation or the development of the idea until you've had more conversations with more people who are closer to the problem than you might be.
Okay, so now I have my problem statement. I have like 150 data points. How do
Mhm.
you help people think about whether they should be launching a nonprofit or a for-profit?
We tend to attract more folks who have had private sector experience and who many of whom have been entrepreneurs or builders. Many of whom have been successful general managers, but not entrepreneurs, but are at a stage in their lives where they don't necessarily want the hustle of launching a for-profit and having to work for investors. So most of the new projects that come out are nonprofits. Not all of them, most of them. When somebody is onto an idea that could go either way. One of my definitions of a social enterprise is that the choice between being a for-profit and a nonprofit is often a legitimate choice at inception. And that the path that you don't take, if you could have been for-profit and you decide to be nonprofit, the path of the for-profit is still relevant to your nonprofit social enterprise because you got to be really clear about capital efficiency. You got to be really clear about the metrics. You got to understand how you're going to grow, what the unit economics might be. And similarly, if you choose to be a for-profit, the nonprofit path you didn't take is going to be very important to talk about the values and measure impact. And so a social enterprise has to choose, and I sometimes get pushback from folks who say, no, you can be a hybrid. And there are some examples of hybrid, and there are some examples of different organizational forms. But in my experience in the United States, given the venture philanthropy and venture capital constructs, you've got this fork in the road that most people are trying to decide which way do I go. And so the four things that my friend and colleague, Caitlin Reimers-Brumé at Mass Challenge and I wrote about in Harvard Business Review, which you could link to that article as well, is one, where is the market? Is the market really ready for this idea? And if you think about the iPhone, it's a genius invention, but the Palm Pilot, which I had in business school, was just kind of early for the personal digital assistant market. The Apple Newton, which preceded the Palm Pilot, was a complete disaster because the market just wasn't ready for people to have that kind of device. So where is the market's readiness? And oftentimes, social entrepreneurs are really very early bellwethers to emerging market ideas. And some of the very earliest internet pioneers, the Whole Earth electronic link in the 1970s, were nonprofits or cooperatives. And so you see often very visionary early leaders, Jacqueline Novogratz at Acumen Fund with launching a nonprofit impact investment management firm was ahead of the entire, multi-hundred-billion-dollar impact investing phenomenon. And so understanding where you are in the market's development, and if you're way, way too early, sometimes it makes sense to ride things out as a nonprofit rather than raise a bunch of money and just not have the market be ready for you because you've got to do so much education. The second question is, will you ultimately be able to sell to your customer a product or service for more than it costs you to make or deliver it? And so you've got to have a sense for customer willingness to pay and the kind of unit economics of making something happen. And if at some point you're never going to be able to make more money on a product and have positive net operating income, then you're likely looking at nonprofit, which is fine. Harvard University has been around 400 years, and each diploma costs more to deliver than we receive in tuition. And so there are ways of sustaining yourself with subsidy, cross-subsidy, grants, government contracts, et cetera. So, but just be clear, it's hard to sustain yourself as a for-profit if you're going to lose money forever, because at some point the investors say, no, thank you. There's a period of time where we can bridge you, and this is where you've been experienced investing. Let's get you through to profitability. If you can never imagine that, then that's a clue. Maybe you should think about the nonprofit. The third is what's the capital market like? We have a great case study in my course on a blood distribution company in Nigeria that could have been for-profit, nonprofit. There was very little venture philanthropy for this idea at the time, where there was actually more venture capital for an interesting new logistics business. And so Life Bank in Nigeria became for-profit, could have been nonprofit, but became for-profit in part because Temi, the founder, was in an ecosystem where there was more venture capital available. Outside of the United States, where there's not a lot of venture philanthropy, the opportunity is often more so to become a for-profit if you can raise angel or seed capital to get you going. There's just more people who can write the $50,000 or $100,000 checks than there are foundations. So that's the third. So one, is the market ready? Two, can you ultimately make a product and sell it for more than it costs? Three, where is the capital market for your early stage idea? And then the final one is really, does being a nonprofit give you access to privileged resources, such as the license from university? Harvard has lots of new ideas being spun off, and it's sometimes easier for them to say, great, we're happy to give you this IP to go do something as a nonprofit because that's consistent with their educational mission. But if it's going to be a for-profit, hey, or can I get access to data, or will customers trust you more as a nonprofit, or does the team want to work for the nonprofit? So there's lots of examples of really trusted resources where people just aren't going to want to, again, be a customer, employee, or business partner to a for-profit in certain industries or context. And so that is the final one. Do you get access to kind of privileged resources by being a nonprofit? And so those are the things that you should think through. And look, the challenge with this is that you need to make the decision when you get the first check. right? Ebony's going to start this new venture and somebody says, I want to write a $50,000 check. Tell me, should I write it as a for-profit investment and I'll take, put it as part of a safe note, or can I get a tax write-off on it? And then you, Ebony, are like, well, I've got this idea. I hadn't yet incorporated yet. Now I need a bank account. To get a bank account, I need to have an organization. To get an organization, I need to kind of decide. And so you weren't expecting me to write you a $50,000 check. And all of a sudden you're like, I got to make this decision. And I don't know all this information about the future. So you often have to make these choices under a tremendous amount of uncertainty. And that's one of the reasons we wrote the article, is to at least empathize with the founders, our MBA students and our ALI fellows. Yeah, this is a hard decision. And there's going to be uncertainty. Here are a few ways to think about it. There's no right or wrong answer necessarily at the time, although time will tell. And sometimes the answer in retrospect or in hindsight is wrong.
What tactical steps do you see people take when launching something new, and what sets people apart that follow through with it versus quit?
To me, I think it's a conviction around the problem that allows people to persist. And I often will, again, define a social entrepreneur compared with an entrepreneur as somebody who is unwilling to let go of the problem, right? If an entrepreneur launches, an eighth grade kind of mentoring app, that struggles to get product traction, but it turns out it's really great at helping the mentors find each other so they can date one another. Like they'll drop the eighth
They'll
graders
pivot.
in a
Yeah.
minute and just like, look, we're just going to do mentor, matching. And this is wonderful. And yeah, yes, it had a social mission to begin with, but look, we got to make money. And so we're going to become a mission driven dating site. A social entrepreneur is going to say, no, we're going to get rid of this mentor matching thing software. We'll figure out, I care about the eighth graders, which is again, why proximity to the problem matters a lot, which is you got to find kind of problem product fit, not product market fit. And so what, from my perspective, people who are successful in persisting towards a pathway to purpose, it is that they're animated by that problem and are just going to keep working on that problem, recognizing that what they do will teach them more than what they can think about. And half of what they learn is going to be from failures, but that the over arching goal and their abiding passion for that problem need to pull them through past the failures.
For people who are happy in their current roles but want to incorporate purpose into their lives, like maybe joining a nonprofit board,
Yeah.
how should they approach these opportunities? And are there other examples? That's just what I could think of.
I think joining a board is an expression of real commitment that might follow an easier first step, which is how you might give a little bit of money or time, either donate or volunteer. But let's just assume there's a spectrum of engagement from, hey, I want to volunteer to help, to, hey, I'm happy to write a $100 check to be a contributor to this. I don't have much time, but this is a cause that I care about and why. Oftentimes, people, I think, don't fully appreciate that buying a ticket to an event and showing up is a form of accompaniment. It's a movement building. If I'm the CEO of a nonprofit, it matters as much that you're at this event than that you wrote a check, because you are creating a sense of excitement. And so just showing up is important. And so, again, to volunteer and or donate and be part of the events that organizations in your issue area are doing, and then ultimately getting to know the staff and other board members can lead you to becoming a board. There's often an expectation on boards of making a financial contribution, so it's good for you to get familiar with the organization before you are sort of stepping into a leadership position or might be asked to do so. But I would go back to some of the original points earlier, like in your, in your day job, what are the organizations that you run across, or in your community, what are the problems you are curious about? I would discourage somebody from quote unquote joining a nonprofit board. I would encourage somebody from exploring leadership opportunities in the mental health community in the greater Boston area, for which you could find the 5 or 10 or 15 amazing organizations, and some are really big who would expect you to be major donor to get on the board, to some who are just getting started, where the founder and CEO might love just a sounding board. But you've got to have a really clear idea of where you think you might want to learn and lean in. before you could take those steps of volunteer, show up, donate, and then become a board member. But on that journey over, a year, 18 months, if you said, hey, I really want to have a meaningful way to contribute, it should be possible if you follow those steps to narrow your focus, make a few bets, learn a bit more, figure out where the chemistry is with the organization and the people within the organization to step into something, an advisory board, a young leaders board that over time might evolve into becoming board service. And I think that would be a very enriching way to complement one's professional day job.
Do you have any parting words for someone trying to make the leap to pursuing causes that they're passionate about?
My parting words would be to just give it a shot. And if you aren't sure what is the cause that most animates you, the two things I would say is, one, if you look into your own personal journey, you might find some clues, some latent and hidden markers along the way of an internship in college, term paper that you wrote in graduate school, an aunt or uncle who had a professional trajectory that you always enjoyed learning about over Thanksgiving, that there are hidden clues of why something might be what you care about. And if you can't find those hidden clues, just try one thing. Again, you can't work for the nonprofit sector. Yes, there are some great sectoral organizations that work sector-wide, but find the issue that you think you care most about. And if it doesn't really make your heart sing, then, ask yourself why not and move to the next thing. But if you can't convince yourself that this is the cause you want to spend time on, you're never really going to convince those in the organizations that are doing hard work who are trying to differentiate. Is this a dilettante and somebody who's not going to show up, or is this somebody who's really here for the right reason? So work on making the case to yourself and your friends and family. And then you should, once you've made that case and have clarity, you should be able to find counterparties and organizations and fellow travelers who care about the same issue as you do. And you'll be able to make a great difference.
Well, thank you, Brian, and thank you for the wealth of resources that you've shared with us today.
It was a pleasure to be with you, Ebony. I look forward to hearing the final episode.
Thanks for listening to Principles of Benevolence. If you like the show, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple or your favorite platform to listen to podcasts. And as an act of benevolence, share with an ambitious friend who wants to build a life with purpose in mind. You can find me at Principles of Benevolence on IG, LinkedIn, and YouTube, and principlesofbenevolence.com. Until next time.